All right, strap in. This is going to be a long one. So the year is 2006, London. I had just graduated from university and I'm looking for my first job. Now I was fortunate enough to land a couple of unpaid internships at a science fiction and fantasy publishing company in the UK. I won't say exactly where. Now, as you can imagine, unpaid internships are not exactly the most glamorous of roles, and there's a lot of, shall we say, thankless admin involved, photocopying, data entry, that sort of thing. But the vast majority of my time working there was spent going through something called the slush pile. Now, for those of you who don't know, the slush pile is a somewhat derogatory name given to the mountain of unsolicited submissions which are sent to publishing companies by wannabe writers. All publishing companies have a slush pile, and they are universally gigantic. Let's just say the science fiction and fantasy market in the UK is oversaturated, to say the least. So the publishing companies receive dozens, and I mean dozens, of unsolicited manuscripts every single week, and the vast majority of these just get rejected out of hand with a simple thanks but no thanks calling card, or sometimes not even that, just complete silence. But then there is the second slush pile. Now this pile is a lot smaller than the first, but it needs a more personal touch because this pile comes from publishing agents, professional third parties who represent writers in a professional context. These people know what publishers are looking for. I mean, it is literally in their job to spot potential gaps in the market and provide clients from their stable of writers who might be able to fill those niches. Oh, is one of your rival publishing companies doing really well selling vampire romance fiction? Well, we've got some vampire romance fiction at home, except ours is unicorn romance fiction or eldritch horror romance fiction. Oh, is Harry Potter selling absolutely millions? Oh, yeah, you really missed the boat on that one, didn't you? Except don't worry, because we've got our own Harry Potter right here, except ours stars a female protagonist instead. Or a goblin. Or a goat. It doesn't matter. Now, although this second pile is definitely more considered than the first one that we talked about, it is still a slush pile. There's no two ways about this. Suffice to say, publishers already have a pretty good idea about what they are looking for up front, and they don't really need to be told what gaps that they should be exploiting in the marketplace. Thank you very much. They can read into industry trends too. So these entries, while fewer in number and higher in quality in theory, do also need to be rejected. They do need to be read, and technically they do need to be considered. But yes, ultimately they will be rejected. It's this weird little kind of dance that writers and agents and publishers all kind of engage in, or at least they used to engage in back in 2006. I don't know if they still do. I don't work in publishing. But frankly, it's kind of stupid, but it does work in the sense that they've all somehow managed to keep their heads above the water financially, despite the fact that very few people buy books these days, and it's super easy to publish online. But yeah, that's where unpaid interns like me come in. My job was to read through this slush pile and essentially come up with a bunch of plausible reasons as to why we are saying no. We are saying no, just to be clear. There is no possibility of us saying yes, but we do need to have an explanation as to why we're saying no, so as to not bruise those crucial publisher-agent kind of relationships that take years to build. So I might look through one entry which is all about King Arthur returning to life in the 21st century, and I might say, I'm not sure this subject matter works well in the UK market because the legend of King Arthur is better known and understood by UK audiences than in the US where this book was originally written. Thanks but no thanks. And then I might look through another which is all about magical races which are based on insects. And I might say, sorry, we think the premise is a little bit too advanced for the average UK reader to get on board with. Elves and dwarves, these archetypes exist for a reason. Ant people and bee people. You're going a bit too far off piste right there. Then I might look through a book about a half vampire slayer, and I might say, we've got a writer on our lists who's very similar to this already. These are all based on real examples, by the way. And then I came across this one book. This one book that, I'm going to be honest now, absolutely blew me away. A book which I read from cover to cover. Figuratively speaking, of course, this was a bound manuscript. There was no official cover at the time. In the course of just 2 evenings, despite the fact that I was only required to read the first chapter before making a decision. A book which I feel happy saying was, at the time, one of my favourite books of all time. It changed my life. It blew me away. That book was Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind, and I feel fairly confident in saying that I was one of the first people in the UK to read it. So I took this manuscript to the head of science fiction and fantasy at this publishing company, and I told him, this is the best fantasy book that I have ever read. We need to make space for it in our lists. And he looks at it and he's like, this isn't what you're here to do. You're not here to try and find things to publish. That's my job. What we need from you is a reason why not to publish. That's all. And I'm like, well, there is no reason not to publish. This book is literally perfect. And he kind of rolls his eyes at me, naive summer child that I am. And he says, look, I'm going to come up with some reasons for you right here. 1, it's a first-time writer. Unproven, we don't know if it's going to sell. 2, there's a really, really high page count here. It's going to be very expensive to print it. 3, it's an American writer. We already have a lot of American writers on our lists. We need to push more homegrown talent. The end. Go back to your desk. So I sigh and I think, well, I tried. There's not much else I can do. But then, about a month later, I managed to land a second unpaid internship, this time over at a different UK-based science fiction and fantasy imprint. And once again, I arrive 9 a.m. in the morning, fresh as a daisy, bushy-tailed, and there's a desk in one corner, an old Windows XP computer on top, and this massive, great big slush pile threatening to bury the whole thing beneath it. And right there, I am delighted to see, resting on top of that slush pile, at least in my memory, it's resting right on top of that slush pile, is the exact same bound manuscript that I'd already seen at the first publishing company. The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So excitedly, I grab it, I turn straight to the editor. I've literally only been inside the building for about 30 seconds at this point, and I say, this book, I've already read it at the other place. Look, they are taking a pass on it. The rights are up for grabs if we move fast. And the editor's like, oh, really? You've read this manuscript? How is it? And I say, honestly, it is the best fantasy novel that I've ever read. We have to publish this here. So she takes it from me, flicks through it a few times, and there's this moment of silence. She says. Verbatim, that was the quote. But fair play to her, she does actually take me semi-seriously. She takes the book away, she reads a couple of chapters by herself, and then she comes back to me 2 days later and she tells me, look, I've read the beginning, couldn't get into it, so we are going to take a pass. And I'm like, well, yeah, the first couple of chapters aren't the best, but you have to read past that. I mean, like 100 pages in, his parents die, he's out on the streets, he's pouring his emotions into his guitar, he's playing this stream of consciousness music, and the strings keep breaking, they keep breaking on the guitar, but he still learns how to play anyway, and he's playing with fewer and fewer strings to make it work, but then the guitar, it gets stolen, it gets pawned off, and he's left with nothing, and it's just this beautiful exploration of grief and depression like nothing that I have ever seen, and it gets so good so fast beyond that point. And she's like, 100 pages in. No one has time for that. Besides, I'm pretty sure that this other publishing company are going to go for it. We don't really want to get into a bidding war. I'm saying no. So suffice to say, my influence over the UK fantasy and science fiction market has always been non-existent. But I am pleased to say that history has at least vindicated my love for this book somewhat, because it is now well renowned as being exceptional. And if you ignore the slightly disappointing sequel and the decade of silence ever since, it is still a pillar of fantasy excellence. It is rich, it is detailed, it has a world that feels real, magic systems that feel plausible and robust, all written with a deftness of touch and this lyrical writing style that is just something to behold. And yes, it sold very well in the UK. All of which is a very long way of saying that in today's video, we are going to be creating a bard in D&D. And for that role, I can think of no other character that fits better than the hero of The Name of the Wind himself, Kvothe. Now, Kvothe is a quintessential bard through and through. As a member of the Ada Moreau, essentially the book's version of a gypsy, he grew up surrounded by performers, storytellers, and musicians. But even among them, Kvothe was always something special. He is exceptionally intelligent, quick-witted, sharp-tongued, and clever, as well as being a talented musician. After his family are brutally killed by a group of demonic people called the Chandrian, Kvothe spends several years living on the streets as an urchin while he deals with his grief before eventually deciding to put his talents to use in hunting down those that did this to him and getting his revenge against them. To this end, he enrolls at the university. There is only one. And despite his exceptionally young age, he quickly rises through the ranks, gaining a name for himself as a talented user of magic, and in particular, the use of the magic of naming, or to put in simpler terms, the ability in the book to gain dominance over a thing by knowing its true name. He gets up to a lot of other adventures as well, of course. He faces a Dracus at one point and comes out alive. He travels into the Feywild and seduces a fairy. He travels to a remote corner of the world and masters sword fighting. He saves the life of a mayor, essentially a king in all but name, who was being poisoned by his own physician. He takes on the legendary Chandrian. In short, he masters everything he tries. A phenomenal musician who doesn't even need all the strings on his instrument to play. He can master languages without even trying. He can lie, he can steal, he can think fast on his feet. And in general, if I'm honest now, he is an insufferable Mary Sue of a character. However, he is also the narrator of his own story. And it's fair to say, considering his background, growing up around storytellers and performers, that he's probably quite an unreliable narrator, to put it mildly. Which is part of what makes this book so gosh darn good for me, because at all times, you're never quite sure how much of what you're reading is real and how much of it is just fanciful imaginings or embellishment. I mean, how can this unassuming innkeeper that we see at the start of the book truly be this legendary figure of folklore without a little, shall we say, self-propagandizing along the way? In other words, he's a bard through and through, and a darned good one at that. So when it comes to building this guy in D&D, for once I am not going to have to scrabble around trying to find proxies for the various features that the game gives to him. If anything, we're going to have to actually edit this guy down in order to fit within the confines of the game. So the question is, how do we edit down this larger-than-life character in such a way that it still feels like Kvothe, but remains balanced within the game of D&D? Good question. Well, as always, we're starting at level 9. His race is human, his background is entertainer, and with that we're going to take ASIs in charisma and dexterity. Once we've applied point buy to his stats, then we are left with this spread. And okay, yeah, that's a bit min-maxed, isn't it? Bit too min-maxed for my liking, so I'm going to take dexterity down a notch and boost up the other two a bit, and yeah, that's better. So now we have a Kvothe who is strong in charisma, dexterity and intelligence. He's weak in strength and wisdom. He does do some very questionable things over the course of the series, and he's okay at constitution. This spread gives us 14 spells that we can then choose from the Bard list. Now, the magic system or systems, if we're being honest, within the Kingkiller Chronicles is complex, to say the least, and it's very different to that in D&D. There are basically 4 types of magic that we see within the first 2 books. There's sympathy, which involves a person exerting their strength of will over an object in order to change the laws of physics that apply to it. So for example, you could take 2 objects, both made of the same material, and by fully believing and committing to the idea that these 2 objects are in fact one object, you are able to then temporarily bind them together. And then after this, lifting one object would also lift the other, although it would weigh twice as much to do so, or heating up one object would heat up the other, again with twice as much energy. And this energy needed, it comes either from the user's own body heat or more safely from a nearby energy source like a fire. This then morphs into sigildry, which is kind of like a permanent version of sympathy. So rather than having a person concentrating on the link between things, instead they use runes and delicate metalwork to perform the same function on a semi-permanent basis. So in this way you can create magical objects that are able to do seemingly impossible things, lanterns that burn forever even underwater, or in the case of something that Kvothe himself actually invents in the books, a device that automatically deflects an incoming missile if you come under attack. There's alchemy, whereby an alchemist can brew potions which can produce all manner of results. And finally, there is naming, the hardest of all the magical disciplines, whereby if someone can find the true name of a thing, such as the wind, hence the first book's title, then they are able to gain full mastery over it. So I think for the most part, we can ignore sigildry and alchemy here. Both of these can be represented through magic items and potions, respectively. What we need, therefore, is spells that will fully represent, or as fully as possible, the abilities that Kvothe exhibits with naming and sympathy. And this is important to note because, yes, while it is true that Kvothe does, for example, viciously mock people in the course of the books, and he does mislead and beguile and trick and do all of these typical things that bards do, he does so using his human, God's-given talents, not magic. The magic system in the Name of the Wind is a lot more grounded than in D&D, and so our choices are going to have to reflect this. So for cantrips, for example, we can go with Mage Hand because this is very similar to how he sympathetically binds objects together and then lifts them. And it also makes sense why there's a £5 limit on what he can lift, because that's what he physically can lift, 10 pounds, twice 5. He also gets light because I can imagine him sympathetically binding an object with the light of a nearby fire or something so it glows, I don't know. And Blade Ward, like I'm imagining a city watchman taking a swing at him with a sword and Kvothe quickly binding together the sword with the stone that he's standing on so that he can't lift the sword very easily. It's a lot heavier than it should be, and then the soldier can't hit him with it, something like this, right? And for spells, we're going to have to be equally selective. I mean, some are no-brainers. Heat metal, absolutely. Shatter. Pyrotechnics, are you kidding me? Magic mouth, yep, of course he can craft something to speak on command. And warding wind. I mean, bards don't get a lot of wind-based spells, but we do need something to reflect his ability to command the wind at will by naming it, so yeah, that'll do. What else? Well, it's pretty slim pickings from here. Yeah, so I'm going to have to kind of squint and turn my head a little to justify fitting them into D&D. Like, fairy fire, maybe? Could he make a creature glow using sympathy to make it easier for someone else to hit them? Sure, although I should point out that using sympathy against a living creature is specifically prohibited by the university's rules, but it's okay. We know he gets expelled eventually. Slow, same deal. Knock, sure, I guess he could smash a door open with sympathy. Thunderwave, blindness, deafness. At the higher level, I think legend lore maybe fits pretty well. We can say that he's thinking deeply and recalling a piece of university knowledge that he'd squirreled away in his head somewhere. And synaptic static. Sure, he could give someone a headache with sympathy, why not? And so there's the spell list. I mean, on a personal note, I'm not super happy with the fact that he has 8 level 2 spells prepared and none at level 4. Not a great way to balance your available spell slots there, but I guess he can upcast. But the bigger issue is that, as I feared at the outset, this is not the most bardic feeling spell list, to be honest with you. Traditionally, bards really excel in D&D at battlefield control, buffing the party, debuffing the enemy, that sort of thing. So normally you'd expect to see more spells like Bane, Hallucinatory Terrain, all of those spells that get inside people's heads like Vicious Mockery, Hideous Laughter, Phantasmal Force, Dissonant Whispers, not to mention all the stuff like Silent Image and Disguised Self that basically lets bards get away with anything they want to between combats. But we don't see Kvothe doing any of those things, and moreover, we know, based on Rothfuss's very well explained laws of magic in his books, that he will never be able to do any of those things. It's impossible. So he doesn't. What he does do in the books, however, is showcase a lot of skills. Like I said, he is an insufferable Mary Sue. And this is lucky because the one thing that bards excel at is the sheer number of proficiencies that they get. And I'm going to go through these quickly. He gets a few of them from various sources like his background and a couple of feats, so I'm just going to cover them all in one block here. So he's going to get Arcana and History thanks to his time at the university. He gets Insight and Investigation because he's naturally very good at looking into and solving mysteries. He gets Stealth, Sleight of Hand and Survival because of his time spent living on the streets, and he's going to get Performance, Persuasion, Acrobatics and Deception for his time with the Ada Moreau. He also gets Expertise in a bunch of these, and because he's a bard, even the few skills that he doesn't have proficiency in, he is half proficient in them anyway. As for feats, well, at level 4 we're going to take the Skilled feat to round out the selection that I already mentioned above, and at level 8 we're going to take Actor because he's a very good performer. It makes sense. I should mention, being a human in the new edition also means he gets an additional origin feat, and here I have selected Crafter, which is a way of giving him all of those tool proficiencies that he needs to do his alchemy and the sigildry that he does. Overall, we're going to give him proficiency in Tinker's Tools, Jeweler's Tools, Alchemist Supplies, and Thieves' Tools via the Skilled feat. As for his other abilities, well, he is a bard, so it's all about those inspiration dice. At level 1, he gets Bardic Inspiration, the ability to inspire those around him. As a bonus action, he can give his allies a scalable dice, which they can add to their rolls. At level 3, he then gets Cutting Words, which is basically like the inverse of this, allowing him as a reaction to spend 1 inspiration dice to reduce an enemy's rolls. Font of Inspiration then allows him to get back his inspiration dice on a short rest. It's just a really nice set of class features, to be honest with you. They fit so well together. Unlike Counter Charm, which he gets at a later level, which kind of sticks out like a sore thumb here. It is completely unrelated to the other features. It lets you re-roll your saving throw against the charmed or frightened condition. I mean, it's useful, it's just a bit out of left field compared with the other features, which was so focused on the Bardic Inspiration dice. Finally, we get to choose his subclass. We're going to go with College of Law, which unlocks for Kvothe 2 additional spell choices, and these 2, thank goodness, can come from the Cleric or Druid spell list, meaning we can take Gust of Wind. And I'm also going to take Dominate Person. I mean, we only see this happen once in the books, but at one point he is able to work out the true name of a fairy that is holding him captive, and in doing so he is able to escape her. He dominates her by learning her name. So there we go, quite a weird build, and quite possibly the least bardic feeling bard in all of barddom. On the one hand, he has a ton of proficiencies, he's a musician, he can inspire and play instruments and all of that lovely bardic stuff, and it feels very on point for Kvothe. On the other hand, well, I mean, his spell list is a bit weird for a bard, and his regular attacks with the rapier are a bit underwhelming, and the AC of 13 there is, yeah, that's not great. But, I hear you cry, how does this version of the bard compare to what we would have got in the previous 2014 version? Is this better or worse than what came before? That is the point of this video, is it not? Great question, I say. Thank you for paying attention. As is par for the course now, the 2014 edition gets fewer spells and fewer proficiencies overall. That's pretty standard for every class we've looked at. And given that Variant Human in 2014 only gives 2 +1 stat increases rather than the +2 +1 of the new edition, we also have worse stats here as well. And some of the spell options like pyrotechnics, they don't even appear on the 2014 spell list at all. The crafter feat also isn't a thing in this edition, but this doesn't matter so much as I can provide an easy proxy for it by taking an additional skilled feat. Yes, that does mean he's taken that feat twice. That's a bit weird, but okay. And he's going to gain all of those tool proficiencies that way. However, I'm not actually sure if the 2024 version is better. Because one very interesting thing to note is that the 2024 version of Bard has actually removed, yes, removed 2 class features from the 2014 version. A 2014 version of Kvothe gets Song of Rest at level 2, which allows party members to gain additional hit points back when rolling hit dice, and Magical Inspiration that lets a party member use Bardic Inspiration to power spells that they've cast. So yeah, that's 2 features that we don't have anymore. Will they be missed? Well, I mean, they aren't the most useful features in the game, they're pretty niche, but it is interesting to see WotC removing abilities, particularly flavorful, fun abilities, at a time when it seems that a lot of the other classes that we've already talked about are all about adding more options to the game. Like, you can totally imagine a bard like Kvothe sitting around the campfire playing his lute during a rest, and this helping his party members to feel more soothed and well rested. It's fun, it's flavorful, you can roleplay with it. I have no idea why they took it out. So with this in mind, how do these 2 versions stack up against each other? Honestly, it would probably go about here between the 2, with a personal preference for the 2014 version. Sure, you do miss out on a couple of additional spells and expertises, but on the other hand, you have 2 really nice class features that scale with your level that are just straight up missing from the new edition. At this level, anyway. Because some of the higher level stuff that bards get is crazy these days. Like in 2014, the 20th level ability that you got allowed you to gain back 1 Bardic Inspiration dice if you had none when rolling initiative. Now you get the equivalent of that feature, twice as powerful, 2 dice back at level 18. And the level 20 ability that you get instead, oh, you have Power Word Kill and Power Word Heal, always prepared. But we're not at that level. We're at level 9. We're down here in the mid-game. And at that point, I would say the older version is better. But what do you think? If you have stuck around for this long, thank you so much for watching, genuinely. Do hit the like button or subscribe if you haven't, and feel free to comment below on how you feel about the Bard and the build that I've made. As always, the links to all of the character sheets that I've shown today will be in the description of the video. And in the meantime, I will see you all next time when we're going to be taking on